saved message. I received your postcard. I live on Atlantic. My name is Catherine Basil, and the phone number is 351.
We were there for about a year, just trying to get them settled in. Heard rumors about this big development coming in, and
because I sensed a lot of anger on the part of the majority of families who lived in that neighborhood and wanted
Eminent domain is a powerful tool the government has, and it should be used as a scalpel and not a bludgeon, which is what occurred in Norwood.
We don't know anything about your postcard, and that's it, but we know that you live on the opposite side of Atlantic, either in one of the homes that's still standing or that's been torn down.
Part of what makes Norwood the place that it is that that it does have a tradition and a history, and you know, families that are connected 3-4 generations back.
It was in the early 70s when Interstate 71 went through over there, and it cut it off.
That essentially cut the neighborhood off from most of the rest of Norwood.
Pretty much everyone I knew moved from Kentucky up to Norwood to work.
We have made the transition from a blue-collar, heavy industrialized city.
The auto plant pumped all sorts of money into Norwood.
All those industries have since departed.
My family moved to Norwood too to work, but my father didn't work at the auto plant, but all of my neighbors did.
So we're left struggling, trying to figure out a way to survive, to put on, you know, to provide the service to our citizens and businesses that we have remaining.
At the time this was starting, Norwood was in kind of shaky financial condition.
And when it left Norwood in a bit of a state of disarray.
There had been big changes in the neighborhood since the early 60s when I-71 was built.
It just cut it off from the city.
And then later there was a lot of commercial development going on the border of the neighborhood. You had the Rookwood Pavilion.
In the late 80s, early 90s, you had the old LeBlanc plant, which is where Rookwood Pavilion and Rookwood Commons eventually went in.
The development started springing up over there where McKenna Tool,
Rookwood Commons and Rookwood Towers, an office development right there.
Machine Tool Company, and then a big warehouse and lumber yard went down, and they started to develop, which was all perfectly above board.
And then the developer felt like it was just natural to extend that and then acquire the property in this neighborhood.
Those shopping centers, the lifestyle shopping centers that the developer has built, are very successful. They happen to be in the right place, in the right market area.
Then the traffic, the quality of life started to go down, and people decided that they wanted out.
And the traffic went from, you know, busy during rush hours to busy all the time.
So yeah, you have the traffic from the expressway on one side, and then
so you had conflicting views. You had people that wanted to stay, people that didn't want to stay.
Certainly they offered a contract to me, but I said I was happy where I was at. I wasn't interested.
And it became noisy.
And it was an easy decision to make at the time. There was a neighborhood here. Nobody had their home up for sale. Everybody liked it here. The kids played out in the front yard.
But it was like an island in itself. You had these quiet little dead-end streets that were surrounded by a river of traffic on Edmondson and Edwards.
Yeah, it wasn't as pleasant a place to live as it had been before a lot of the development came in.
I had tenants in my apartments.
Say you have 100 properties in an area that's being threatened by eminent domain. I think initially you're going to see about a quarter of them are going to be, great, I wanted to sell my house anyway, I'm out of here.
The residents in the city, I'd say
another quarter or maybe half are going to be on the fence, you know. They might sell if the number's right.
80-85% in favor, 20 to 15% against.
And then that last quarter is going to end up being like myself, diehard, we want to stay here for whatever reason, you know.
Everybody that was in favor voted for eminent domain was reelected.
So my, challenge is, as a reporter, was to try to cover all the aspects of the case, and I quickly found out that there were more aspects of it than just two, than the property owners and the city.
As you know, part of the debate is that this was an improper use of eminent domain, and I think you've already addressed that, but I'd just like to give you an opportunity to
At the time the proceedings started, it followed the state law.
This used to be a wonderful neighborhood, hard to tell now, but destroyed about 77 nice homes, tree-lined streets.
The eminent domain case in Norwood was a critical precedent-setting case.
It's an act that government has, or a power that government that has never been popular.
There are times that the government has to do something which will be for the greater good.
Public officials generally don't like to use it because politically it's unpopular and it can be expensive.
In income and taxes, it's costless.
It has huge financial repercussions for most people.
It's hard to calculate, but it costs us a lot.
My attorneys were well over $125,000, and that's out of my pocket.
This is a classic case where you just have certain properties and you just want to change the use regardless of what may happen. So the very purpose of the government to use eminent domain for the benefit of the community, I think, in my opinion, is weakened.
It survived a long, lengthy court of appeal, or common pleas court trial.
Because it does not look at the overall framework of the community and then justify its actions and then plan for it and then go for it.
People just can't fight it financially.
It survived a first district court of appeals trial.
Since the U.S. Supreme Court Kelo versus New Haven, Connecticut decision came out in 2005.
They brought in an organization called the Institute of Justice.
Eminent domain has gotten certainly a higher profile nationally.
And it did not survive the Ohio State Supreme Court trial.
And some people feel that that case influenced the Norwood case with the Ohio Supreme Court.
It set off a shockwave among states where 38 different states have begun enacting eminent domain limitations within their states so that the federal government does not supersede their solidarity.
They would take these factors that your garage is separate from your house, it's not attached to your house, or you have a cul-de-sac, or there's diversity of ownership, those are all problems with your neighborhood.
Now, one could perhaps argue it, well, it's in Norwood's best interest to expand a shopping center because that increases the tax base. Yes, but nonetheless, it's a private developer. It's not that they were doing this to build a school, a civic center, or something that was absolutely in the public's best interest.
They said we were blighted. I think with some of the criteria that they used to label our neighborhood blighted, they could have blighted the White House. I mean, it's a house sitting in a downtown, a lot of offices.
So in many different cases around the country, that public benefit began to be expended as an idea. What is a public benefit?
It was for private enterprise. And I feel that's wrong. That's an infringement. That's government going too far in the taking of private property for someone else's business gain.
If a community achieves economic development, then there'll be a benefit that will accrue to the people who live there.
Basically, from what my understanding is the state Supreme Court said a law that's been on the book for 50 years and has been used for 50 years is now unconstitutional.
That's the great thing about property ownership in America. Supposedly, if you want to stay there, it's yours, theoretically.
So a law we had been following for years was ruled to them to be unconstitutional. And we live by it.
It's a big development coming in, what turned into a national eminent domain battle right here on our little block.
Why did that happen? Did the government do its job well?
This all went terribly wrong. The city came in and jumped on the bandwagon with the developer that had an idea.
But the city of government did not do any planning. I mean planning to say, okay, we have something good happening here. Let's look at the whole picture.
There was a lot at stake for a lot of different parties.
Let's look at our community. Let's see how that relates with that area.
Other developers from other projects didn't want this to go either.
Let's look at the transportation systems. Let's find out the consequences of additional traffic.
Competing for potential tenants.
Let's work with the Ohio Department of Transportation, with the city of Cincinnati.
Joe Horny's property is right in the middle of the site, so until he sells, there isn't a whole lot the developer can do.
But at the same time, it's not that far off that somebody may say, the heck with it, I'm just going to do something and build big concrete walls around and let them figure out what to do with the property.
As we look at it now, we can look at it and say, man, what a mess. What a mess has been created. And you know, a lot of people have told me, well, if you would have sold, we wouldn't have this. But
it's unusual for the vast majority of property owners to be eager to sell.
A good chunk of the people that sold their properties willingly, when I say willingly, it was really more they saw what was coming down on them.
What was achieved by the whole thing, I think, is a waste, a complete waste. Because now, it's not only crazy and absurd to see this scene there, but the reasons are pretty obvious.
What it's come down to is it's yours unless the government wants it, or a private developer.
At this point, they should learn from what's taken place up until now.
if they'd have done this right, if they didn't come in and threaten people out of their homes and businesses, we wouldn't have this situation.
Mentally draining, causes divorce.
The people that wanted to sell were getting mad at us because we weren't doing anything.
It was neighbor pitched against neighbor.
Some of the people in our area got divorced over it, causes death. We've lost a couple people to death and cancer.
And other people were getting mad at us because we were getting involved.
I think just the stress of a 4-year battle like that's just, it's huge, big time.
I don't think that, in my opinion, our victory is going to stop any development from happening. There's no doubt in my mind we're going to see this area developed eventually. It's not going to remain like this. And if anything, I think from my perspective, my victory is actually going to force these developers to do a better job for the community when they're proposing bringing new development and urban planning into a community. I think even for the city, I think it's going to make them perhaps put a little more work into the process, and I think in the end this is ultimately a victory for everybody.